Welcome to Zero Shot, the AI podcast without the hype. I'm Llew Jury, the Managing Director of Advancer. And as always, I'm joined today by James Gauci, the CEO of Cadent. G'day, James.
Hey, Llew. How's it going, mate?
I'm really well. It's a beautiful afternoon here and ready to rip into episode 18 of the Zero Shot podcast. Wow, 18 episodes, and we've been cutting through a lot of AI noise, haven't we, James? It's been awesome.
Been trying to.
What have we been covering? We've been doing the tools and the governance and the talent and the human shift and, even agents and things like that. But today we're doing something a little different. We're talking about organizations, aren't we? Have had all of those conversations about AI and then maybe you've done little or nothing. And, we're going to start looking at what it's actually cost them, James.
100%. Like, I've just come back from Japan, and the cost of not implementing the kinds of changes that need to be made in order to make money using technology. Like in the past, we called it digital transformation. These days, we're throwing around terms of trying to label it like the AI revolution or the AI transformation. But, in Japan, they've actually quantified the cost of the paralysis in their economy, and it's trillions of yen, so lost productivity, missed opportunities. Some people saw that wave coming, but a lot of them waited too long to move. And so we've got to look at some real stories, some real consequences from the latest wave of changes, as well as the coming wave of changes, but also we should be informed by the past as well, because this history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And so we want to see what's still possible for organizations listening to this right now who recognize themselves in what we're about to be talking about, right, Llew? This one's going to be a pretty sharp one, and maybe some people will sit up and take notice.
Absolutely. And maybe when you're listening today, what goes on in your boardroom, you might be able to take some of the principles from today and head on down via riding your horse. James, our sponsors are Prompt Cowboy. Would you like to give them a shout out?
I would love to. This episode is brought to you by Prompt Cowboy. And here is our connection to today with Prompt Cowboy. One of the most common reasons organizations don't do anything with AI is because their people try it once and then they get a bad result. And they conclude with that very limited data set that AI is not for them. And that bad result usually comes from a bad prompt. And that's what Prompt Cowboy helps to fix. So their agentic prompting feature helps teams build prompts that actually work before they put them into any workflow. So if inaction is a problem in your organization, Prompt Cowboy is one of the most practical starting points available to you. So head on over to promptcowboy.ai and tell them we sent you.
Yeah, that's it. Tell the boys, Matt and Henry. So awesome. Tool of the week. We've just been discussing offline, James, some tools that we're using, and we've both become coders. You're already a bona fide coder and software engineer extraordinaire, aren't you? But I'll become one as well.
There are a lot of people who have worked with me who are laughing at that phrase that you just said right now.
Well, especially and me as well. When I mention the word coder or software development and my brand, it doesn't really, there's not really a parallel drawn. But in terms of what you've been looking at, you've been checking out Hermes and all that sort of open claw world, and tell the listeners what that is like and the direction of the industry down that path of Hermes and how it's getting a really big name.
Yeah, Hermes is one of the logical kind of competitors to OpenClaw, which many of us will remember. OpenClaw came out about, 4 or 5 months ago now, made a big splash, lots and lots of downloads as a bit of a harness for LLMs to actually take control of a fully fledged computer and do things that hypothetically humans can do with computers. Of course, very error prone and lots of security issues under the microscope. And so since then, there's been a lot of rationalization of OpenClaw by different organizations. Like we saw NVIDIA come out with a version of OpenClaw called NemoClaw, which was essentially a fork of OpenClaw. And they put their own models into it and they tweaked around the edges to make it more reliable and things like that. They wanted to make it an enterprise OpenClaw. But Hermes is a little bit different in that it's a little bit lighter than OpenClaw. It doesn't pretend to do everything, and it doesn't aspire to do everything. It tries to limit things to things that are manageable. So all of the things that we're now used to in our Claude desktop client, for example, where it can use a browser and it can use the file system and things like that. It's another step further into it having more fully fledged control over a computer, but their goal is to make it simple and light and not quite as heavy and complicated as OpenClaw was. And one of the benefits to that is it's usually a little bit more predictable and manageable, and potentially a little bit more secure as well. So yeah, it's under the microscope here at Cadent, and we're considering it as a candidate as one of our service offerings at the moment. So that's pretty exciting.
Very exciting. And it's obviously open source. It's open. It's free. Where do you go to get Hermes? Is it through the Git environment? Where
Yeah.
do you go and get?
Yeah, Hermes is available for free on GitHub if you want to go and try it out. Obviously, do so at your own risk and do so securely and things like that. But yeah, you can head on over to GitHub and try it out if that's something you're comfortable doing. But for the people who aren't, or the people who have controls in their organizations, like cybersecurity controls, or they're in regulated industries, that's kind of the offering that we're going to be putting forward, which is we'll manage all of that for you and provide support for that agent system as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, and myself, I've also joined the coding fraternity. And look, anybody that's got a paid version of Claude Code or Claude, just $30 a month Australian, things like that, you can actually download the app. There's an app that's really cool for Claude, and basically it gives you the chat, it gives you the co-work, which is sort of an agentic framework for you to start doing AI agents and getting it to do tasks. I've got a really cool Fuel Watch agent that I built in that one. And then I've actually gone into the code section. There's a third area called code. And what I did was I actually used Terminal. Now, Terminal is where software engineers live. It's on every single Mac, and I fired it up. And actually, I got Claude working on there. I don't know how I did it. I used a command that Claude told me to use. And I actually then got it working, and I hooked up some tokens and credits. And I did what everybody's now doing in the software development world is spend 2 days going down a rabbit hole, but actually having to pull my credit card out and top up my Anthropic account, my Claude account, because I was blowing some tokens. It was joined your world, James, of really blowing tokens, and it was good fun. But it was $70. It wasn't too much, but you can blow thousands if you let it run and do things and all of that. But anyway, I'm setting up our intelligence platform at Advancer, and that will be a whole repository and a knowledge system for every single agent that we build. And it's a very exciting platform. It's going to have a lot of cool features in it for our clients. Yeah, basically building that out, and it actually told me how to put that whole package that it made. It made all the software, and it actually uploaded it to my GitHub account. It's actually pushed it to. I was originally on Cloudflare, but now it's on Vercel, and it's actually incredible because I'm doing effectively what a software programmer would do, and I'm literally the layperson that kind of knows how to log on and use
Mm.
GPT really well. I do a lot of training in generative AI, but this is super good times when hunters like me can have a crack.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting fully vibe coded prototypes from our clients now, and they're like, "How do we make this production ready?" And that's
Yeah,
now turning into what shops like ours do, who traditionally would be going from scratch on a ground up system. The development of user interfaces is like the marginal cost of that kind of work is just so much lower than it used to be. But it increases the quality of the deliverable and makes sure everybody's expectations are a little bit more aligned, and that's what kind of excites
super
me from
excited.
a service delivery perspective for sure.
Yeah,
Let's get into it
let's
though,
dive
Lou.
into it.
I'm
Yeah,
ready. I'm ready for some conversation.
let's
Where
do it.
should we start, do you think?
Well, look, I think the big thing today is about the anatomy of inaction, and I suppose what smart organisations are doing. Are they doing nothing, James? Are they doing a little bit of a toe in the water? And how are they actually preparing themselves? Where do we start in this whole area? If there's been a bit of theatre going on maybe for 12 months in some organisations where they've got Copilot, they've run a bit of a pilot, they've ticked the box, they've put an AI policy in. They've given it to the executive team. Maybe the executive team now have gone, you know what, we're going to move to Claude or ChatGPT Enterprise. And they formed a few working groups. They got an AI ambassadors program up and running. They did all these really cool things that were happening into 2025. But what's actually the cost of doing nothing and moving truly from pilots to strategy and actual deployments? And is that an internal thing? Is that an external thing? Let's talk about Australia, but also what about in Japan? Like, let's
Mm,
reflect back on what you said in the opening remarks.
mm.
I actually think we need to know the cost of inaction.
So when I was in Japan for Sushi Tech conference in Tokyo and did like as part of a trade delegation to Shizuoka Prefecture as well. One of
Where's that?
the
Where's that, James?
So it's about
Where
an
about?
hour south on the bullet train, and it's where Suzuki came from. It's where Yamaha came from. It's where Tamiya, that makes scale models and paints and things, they came from there as well. So, like traditionally, you look at kind of geographies like that and you think, oh, well, they're technologically enabled, they're innovative, they've got engineering culture, et cetera, et cetera. But it turns out like one of the reasons why we were there was because we were part of the Moreton Bay trade delegation, and that's where I live. And they were signing an MOU to establish essentially an economic partnership between the cities. And one of the things that came up, which I was shocked by, is the fact that last year the Japanese government determined that they'd lost 12 trillion yen per year due to lack of modernization of the economy. And as a kid who grew up in the 90s, like idolizing Sony and Nintendo and looking at Japanese cars and driving them in Gran Turismo, like you think of Japan as like super modern, super contemporary, really technologically enabled. But the reality is a lot of the heritage industries like food and agriculture, like manufacturing, they haven't kept pace with the global race, and especially the likes of China, who have just really accelerated ahead. And so when they're losing $78 billion a year because of this lack of transformation, it really put into focus some of these economic priorities, but it also put into focus for me as a business person the opportunity that that represents, and the fact that if we can take decisive action now with the capabilities that we're developing in AI, we could even get ahead of that race and develop some of those opportunities. And that's part of the reason why those partnerships are starting to crop up at the global level. It's because those opportunities have been identified, and these governments do want businesses to take advantage of them. So yeah, really interesting kind of takeaway there.
Like super interesting. There's about two or three takeaways out of that that I'd love to explore, but we'd probably don't have enough time. We do a whole podcast. The first one for me is about risk aversion masquerading as sort of a governance thing, right? And
Mm,
leaning back in. And this reminds me a bit. I used to go around about, I don't know, 15 years ago, and some of the reload guys, if they're listening to this, would hear me say this. It's about being brave, right? And it's about being brave as either an economy and looking at, as a macro, looking at all those partnerships that you might be able to do between, the city council you talk about and Japan and that prefecture. And also being brave. We used to say be brave with your design and creativity and your ads and your go-to-market strategies and all that. It seems to be sort of Groundhog Day. You've got to be brave in this situation of AI. You've got a moment in time to remain competitive and not end up like you talk about now that the Japanese have calculated those eye-watering numbers.
mm,
And I think that, the problem we probably have sometimes is consensus culture requiring everybody to agree, or there's sort of analysis paralysis before you can move. You've got opportunity costs and sunk costs and all these sort of things right in front of you if you're on the C-suite. And I actually think that it's actually board and governance and CEO driven, right? Which
mm,
then unlocks, the organization to do AI properly and quickly and efficiently and effectively, not just the tool stack or the technology.
mm.
It seems to be something that we come across all the time, isn't it? So,
It comes
you
back
know,
to the human shift, to coin a phrase, Lou, like where we think that it's the technical aspects that are holding us back, but it's so often our culture or our method of decision making, which is a governance function, that holds us back. What are the friction points that you've seen out there? Like, what are the things that kill momentum every time when we hit a board table?
look, I hear it all the time, and yeah, weekly I would hear. The room normally feels pretty optimistic when you walk in. Everybody at the beginning, we're bringing in some AI, and they're going to help us out, and AI consultants and AI trainers and all that sort of thing. Everybody wants to be on the right side of the history, if you like, of making
Mm,
those key brave decisions that we talk about. But no one wants to come into the conversation, the AI strategy conversation, wanting to be the person who said no, wanting to be the
mm,
person that basically starts to question who owns the data, what does the legal say, what does risk say, what's the return on investment model here, and
mm,
each of those questions. is legitimate in isolation, right? So the problem is, that they do stack up, and instead of one person basically making a call to work through them in a sequence, the group normally disperses, and sometimes that's how it gets killed. The momentum gets killed. A bit of group think happens, we call it,
Mm.
and things sort of die off, and you're left with holding a basket of maybe definitely not POVs, proof of values. You're holding a basket of POCs, pieces of crap, maybe, James.
I think we're allowed to say crap on this podcast. That's not going to get bleeped out, is it, Yenia?
It's our podcast, mate. We can say what we like. But I think the big thing is it's got to belong to everybody. Any decisions
Mm.
belong to everybody, and you can't have that analysis paralysis. You can't, especially with AI. You've got to be careful with your security, careful with your data. And if you've listened to any of these episodes, we do harp on about that quite rightly. But I think that the decision making and the judgment is really important. So,
So it
what
sounds
about
to
James?
me, it sounds to me like you're referring there to accountability, which is
Absolutely.
like something that I encounter all the time is the fact that the first thing on every list of AI governance ethical principles or frameworks or what have you, it's like you've got to have an accountable person or people for your AI systems. That doesn't have to be a new person or a new office or a new whatever. It just has to be a person who has KPIs related to the implementation of those programs. It's not new, it's not different. It's just like, this is a new capability. We have to have somebody across it, and it has to be their job. And that's not unusual. But for some reason, we're treating it as unusual, or maybe the perceived risk of the people who would normally take accountability for these systems is too high for them to go, yeah, I'll take on AI, because they're not kind of comfortable with it enough yet. So I think there's an interesting dynamic that occurs there, because when, as a AI governance professional, you come in and say, so we're going to be accountable, right? Everybody kind of side eyes each other. It's like, who's going to be accountable for this thing? And it doesn't sound like an AI governance control, but it is. Uh, and it's a general governance control in organizations as well. There's got to be
Yeah.
accountable people at the helm.
I actually think I totally agree. And I think if we look in isolation at where, like I actually think sometimes, you've got to actually look at the type of organization. Generally, if it's government or it's public money or anything like that, you're going to get a little more risk aversion, and accountability, sometimes is displayed in different ways. So I think, a lot of those organizations, for example, are taking it slowly and
Mm,
taking their time to make those decisions. The key message is, by doing Copilot training in isolation, you're not doing AI. And I
mm,
think that that's the critical piece, that it goes bigger and broader than just, bringing in an expert to train you for 4 or 5 hours on Copilot and how to use it. I actually think you need to actually then work in teams to come up with proof of values that are going to move the needle in your organization. So it's a stepping stone, isn't it?
mm,
Otherwise, it becomes true inaction, and I think that becomes the issue. So, what about the real costs? The next sort of segment of what we're talking about here. What about what weighting is actually taken from businesses, James? What have you seen? Back to this quantifiable number in trillions of dollars or
mm,
trillions of yen.
mm.
What can we bring that down to the business level? What does the cost of actually doing nothing look like for, say, 100-person business over 12 months? Are we talking loss of revenue because they didn't even know that they had to remain competitive, or their competition is way more productive and cost
Mm,
efficient?
mm.
Where can we see these actual costs at the business level?
So there's a case study that comes to mind that I often refer to in cybersecurity contexts. And the reason why this is related, and related pretty tightly, is because of the cost of inaction, right? So is an organization called Australian Clinical Labs. They had a breach around in the wake of COVID, about 5 million customer records here in Australia, and including sensitive health records and so on. And there is in Australia the notifiable data breach scheme, and which requires, under certain conditions, organisations of certain sizes to report that they've had a data breach. They knew about the data breach. They chose not to report it, which of course was not a reasonable thing to have done. But what came to light was this 5,500 person organisation in 2021 didn't even have a cybersecurity team.
Wow.
And that, to me, is a great example of an organization that just missed the boat to such a large extent that they didn't just have a little problem like something that money could fix. They had a huge reputational and regulation related nightmare on their hands
Yeah.
because the poor IT team leader who'd been handed a kind of a this is what cybersecurity looks like piece of paper 2 years previous just simply didn't have the capabilities to understand that they had a huge breach on their hands. And the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, rightfully, I think, came down on the leadership of that organisation. And I don't know whether there were any fines involved or whether it was just a rap on the knuckles and make sure you clean up your incident response policy or procedure. But that's beyond a commercial bit of damage there to that organization.
Mm.
And it reminds me of the Medibanks and the Optuses and things like that, the big breaches that we've had over the years here in Australia, where you just have to ask the question, was that avoidable? And now we have such a huge demand for cybersecurity and AI expertise on our boards. Is this going to be too little too late, or have we learned the lessons of the past? It remains to be seen. But I think that there is a bit of a responsible AI time bomb being
Yeah.
crafted as we speak,
Agree.
where we're gonna be, as especially larger businesses that have a higher bar and higher levels of expectations from government. There's going to be a bit of a day of reckoning at some point in the future. It's not a question of whether, it's a question of when, right?
Yeah, all that precedence we've talked about it on the pod before. Like precedence being gathered right now from people using AI in the potentially wrong way for HR and all those sort of things. But it goes into the people side, doesn't it?
Mm,
You're talking in a real critical way about the best AI capable talent is not waiting for the organization to catch up,
mm,
right? They're going to go to organizations that look after them and make sure that they're already moving into this framework where it protects them as humans working in that organization.
mm,
And, they just know that across every sector, there's people going to the organizations that have those cyber teams and those security teams and all of that. So, rather than just as sort of a young person, building agents and automating workflows, they actually can now go, right, well, I'm going to go to that organization that uses even just good password hygiene and
yeah,
controls and are working their way as an agency like we are towards ISO 2701 and but putting in place these best practice behaviors because the cost is going to be pretty huge if you get it wrong, right? So
mm,
yeah, I definitely look, in the mid market, I see the talent piece as being the critical piece, and we're doing some
mm,
hiring at the moment. And you can buy technology, you can go and use it on the weekend, like me with Claude Code. You can deploy a system, but you can't easily pick the amazing internal champions that are going to basically make that system stick. To your point, Jack,
mm,
around the security protocols and the engineering side. So, and again, coming back to the vibe coding landscape that we're in, it's going to be the people that translate the AI and what it can actually do for the business, as well as build the trust and security. They're going to become the superhuman.
the interesting thing that I've noticed, and this was there's some publications that come out pretty regularly from the Queensland government around the state of the talent industry, like the state of talent across industries in particular sectors, and technology obviously is one of the key ones there. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's been a huge drop off in entry level roles hiring in
Mm,
technology, and a charitable reading of that is, oh well, AI is taking all the entry level jobs, and it's really hard to get a new job for a young person in today's economy, and computer software engineers are kind of finding it tough and things like that. But then I remember, like, hang on a minute, we've been talking about productivity for such a long time, and the AI revolution is here, and why are we hiring less people into technology enabled roles? And it seems to me that a failure mode that may be emerging is that the budgets are constrained, the middle managers are protecting their jobs and by extension their budgets as well, and they're failing to develop the capabilities that will get their organizations to the next stage of maturity and to riding the next wave.
yeah,
because
interesting.
like the reality is that the kids that are coming through now went through high school with AI. You know,
Yeah,
they're AI native in the same way that somebody like me would have been called a digital native 20 years ago. And so for someone like me who went through that process myself, I see huge missteps happening, huge lost productivity at the economic scale in our own country now because of an inability to build a talent pipeline for the future. Is that something that you've noticed
Yeah,
when you've been hiring, Lou? Like, are there
yeah,
really capable people that are just getting overlooked, do you think?
100%. And we're doing a hire right now for an AI engineer, and it's a full-time role. And we had to turn off the applications at 150. Now, of that, 130 really good people, but probably wouldn't fit within the auspices of what we're doing. Out of that 20, everybody's capable. It's amazing to look at. We're in the middle of the first round of interviews. We're running a real tight process on an initials, and we're actually getting people coming in who are awesome humans. We're finding that basically it seems to be people are leaving, the talent is leaving and already maybe checked out of the organization they're working for because we're seen to be pretty cool and advance as an AI agency, and we're moving faster as a perception,
Mm.
right? And I think that's a critical message for the listeners and the viewers that you're really going to need to make sure you're a place that you want to have your existing talent that know where the skeletons are buried in the business, and we want to know, you want to know that they're actually going to be there to go on this transformation journey with AI rather than having to go through a hiring process. So it's been really interesting to look at the variety and the layers of who's actually been applying. That's the
Mm.
first thing. Their experience, where backgrounds they've come from, and it's all sorts. It's everything. Some of the young, awesome, hungry 2 to 3 year juniors that are actually applying for the role and have got super good confidence and things like that. It's actually making it very hard, and this is why I use a couple of guys to do some recruitment. Shout out to Jimmy if he's listening. And this is why I use them. And Jimmy, as soon as he saw the ad, he texted me from his location and he said, "I'm here for you if you need me." Because it's because these people are coming out of organisations where maybe there's been a bit of inaction. So I'm seeing it firsthand right.
Yeah, the preconditions have to be there, and in some ways that's the value proposition of a third party, right? Like, if you want cutting edge people, they want to work with cutting edge organizations, and if you're not a cutting edge organization, that's okay because every organization has its own risk appetite and its own adoption, like place in the adoption curve, and not every organization is going to be at the cutting edge, but the people at the cutting edge are actively taking losses. That's why it's called the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, because we're
Right.
bleeding at the bleeding edge in order to bring the innovations that one day the laggards will be like, well, we have to have that and it's got to be perfect or else. So yeah, I totally understand that. It makes me wonder, Lou, you've helped organizations recover from AI gaps in the past. What does the first 90 days kind of actually look like? Like, what's the thing that separates organizations that
Yeah.
successfully close the gap to the ones that kind of try and fail? And we've kind of talked about this a little bit in past podcasts, but
Yeah.
maybe there's nuance here that we can bring to this conversation.
Look, the ones that I suppose fail try to change everything at once. They try to do too
Mm,
much. It's like doing prompting, right? When you go and open up your Claude or your ChatGPT and you try and do a mega prompt, you've got to do a bit of a chain, right? We love
mm,
chaining and a few shot examples and things like that with prompting. They try and do everything at once. They deploy too broadly. They report broadly. They don't do succinct reporting. And when the results are mixed, they sort of become reactive because in the early stage, the results are always mixed with this world. If you're reporting too broadly and you're sort of doing a bit of a spray and all that sort of thing, you're not going to isolate where the problems are and what's working and what's not working. The good companies that are doing that, I've got an automotive group that does the opposite to that. What they do is they put a lot of detailed reporting into the key proof of value that you might be doing. For example, voice AI, right? And they've got dedicated people, 4 or 5 people. It's not their full-time job. No one has budgets to have 4 or 5 dedicated people into one voice agent. But basically what they do, they observe and they become obsessive with customer-facing service. So they basically make sure that, is this the best thing for our customers? Because they've got thousands of them, right? And so they become obsessive around that, and everybody is working towards the common goal. But they're not just broadly putting in 20 agents or 20 AI custom AI builds or things like that. They're doing it in a very much a first use case, and let's then move on. So one workflow, one metric to report on, one owner. So there's always one owner, and then you start to expand. So it probably goes against all the instincts that you feel that you want to try and get everything done at once. But the successful businesses that I'm seeing are basically not burning resources, and they're producing outcomes, I suppose, that they learn from very quickly.
And
What about you?
what about the organizations that invested a lot early,
Yeah,
tried to boil the ocean, um,
boil
a-
the ocean. Yep.
and now they've got a bit of sunk costs about it. Like, do they feel as though, have you seen any of that? And what are the attitudes of organizations like that when you encounter them?
We're pretty lucky because we haven't seen a lot of it because we play in the mid market. So we play in that, that small and medium enterprise with a focus on the medium enterprise. So that's anything from sort of a 10 to $20 million company. Some of our clients are sort of 400 million, but that's sort of where we finish. We don't do
Mm,
government, and unlike yourself, we don't do government and that sort of world. A little bit of training here and there for them, but what I see is they haven't spent a lot, James. The mid market's been quite guarded, quite
mm,
rightly, which is the thematic of this whole podcast today.
mm,
Some of them have put a bit of a toe in the water doing a bit of Copilot training. They've then backed Copilot out, but they haven't really blown the 20, 30, 50, 100K yet, generally and broadly. There may be one or two that have given it a crack and gone down the wrong path, but as long as they actually have all the disciplines that I just talked about the metrics and the ownership of it and the visibility and the governance and things like that, they generally come to us in pretty good shape. And
mm,
we become their trusted advisors, and then we basically can help them with anything they want to do. So we then go back to the future, though. We go back and say, right, what have you done? What are the outcomes you want to achieve? How do you want to report on this North Star that you want to achieve?
mm.
And as I've said on the pod many times, our simple mantra is, does it create more revenue for you, or does it create cost efficiency and productivity uplift? And if it doesn't pass that test, then we don't do it. So we reflect on what we've spent on, but we haven't had too much exposure. What about you? Have you seen anything, James, where organisations, I suppose, and business leaders have been in tears or recognise that something's gone wrong? And what's the first thing you would tell them on a Monday morning? Like, what do you say to them? What are the messages? If you seen anything like that?
The anti-pattern that I see is that a lot of AI users think they are AI experts. And
Yeah.
this is not to be derisive of these people, because these are very powerful tools, and they make you feel like you've got superpowers. Like when you're using it for the first time, you're like, I have access to the world's knowledge and I can get a bit of synthesis out of this system and I don't have to do it. I can offload all of my cognitive work to this cloud server somewhere and I can just get back passable work product.
Or when they use Claude in the browser.
Yeah.
That's a definitive moment for most people, isn't it?
Yeah,
Sorry,
or
keep
when you're
going.
using Claude Code like you were over the weekend, and all of a sudden you've got a more or less internal production ready prototype of that system that you'd been dreaming of for the last 6 months, and it's really tempting to feel like you're at the forefront in those moments. But that's also, the Dunning-Kruger effect, like which, by the way, everybody has been scientifically debunked. There is no real, genuine, scientifically proven effect there, but it is a nice little shorthand, which is the better you think you're doing, probably the worse off you are. And it's the kind of thing where we encounter a lot of people who have been avid users of AI systems, but they haven't reached the peak of what they can do with it yet.
Mm.
And the reality is that there's always more that can be done. And the limitation then becomes your own capabilities to get what you need out of that system or what you want out of that system. You need to know what question you're asking in order
That's
to get a decent answer.
so spot on. And I said that yesterday. I ran a couple of one session for an organization, and I said to them in the room, "You're here. Well done. That's the first thing. So there's
Mm,
no inaction. So
mm,
it's anti what we're talking about today. It's brilliant that they're all there, and we're running a number of these workshops. I said you're probably getting 5 to 10% out of your GPT that you're using, and hopefully by the end of this 4-hour workshop, you'll get 30 to 50%, and you'll get that arbitrage and that uplift that will make all the difference." And I asked them then at the end, and I said, "Did you feel that you got that?" And they said, "Yeah, absolutely. We want to come back." So already the organizer, who's really cool, she's organizing advanced courses. And
mm.
so we're doing some advanced ones. So in a month or two, we can come back in as we put it in their hands. But it's
Yeah.
funny you say that, because I actually think there's, everybody, you've probably got 90% more, that you can pull out of $30 a month or Teams, program, package that you're doing. So, yeah, super cool, super cool. Anything else, James? Like, what about organizations recovering? Sorry, I want to go back to the question. What do you say to a leader? What do you
Mm,
say to a leader that you've gone in and done a bit of noses in, fingers out,
mm,
and you've found maybe a few problems?
mm,
What are the messages you talk to and talk about? And maybe for the listeners, this is in case they also, because we know there's a number of leaders that listen to this pod. Um, you know, how would you have that conversation with your staff?
mm.
How would they go about the messaging of productivity, what recovery looks like, the difference between, hey guys, we've still got a lot of time, it's not
Mm,
too late.
mm.
What are some of the key frameworks there?
I think it's important to remember that the ship hasn't sailed. Like the ship is being constructed and the sails are going up. But let's get on board now. Like there's
Yeah,
no better time than the present. And what comes to mind is like the time value of money. My finance lecturer from my master's is just ringing in my head. It's like if you've got a decision between starting compound growth now and starting compound growth in 12 months' time, that's like a 100% return decision sometimes, depending on the kind of conversation you're having. Like, let's say we're doing an AI project, and the ROI of doing that AI project, we expect that that'll be $10,000. Like, let's pick a modest return, $10,000 in productivity return to the team over the course of the next 12 months. That $10,000 of productivity, you can reinvest that $10,000 of productivity in stuff that's going to make you even more money. And
yeah,
so once you've actually sorted out that initial implementation, not only have you got that technology asset in place that's giving you returns, you can then reinvest those returns in the things that are going to make you even more money. And that may be AI, maybe more AI projects, but it also may be more staff for an underserved team, or it may be more dividends for the shareholders. Like it's then a strategic decision that we make as business people. And so I think that there is no too late. The time is now. And the question is, what is the appropriate pace and what's the appropriate part of your organization that we're going to instigate some change in, and doing that in a way which is palatable to your staff. Like you mentioned,
without
the
breaking them.
yeah, that's right. And it's always got to be people and process and tools and information. If you don't tick all four of those boxes when you're doing a technology project, you're probably not going to get the ideal outcome. You may get an outcome, like you may have a project that was delivered and that system got built, but people might not be using it. It might not be integrated into the system. It might be handling or creating some of the wrong kinds of data.
Yeah.
And then you've got systemic failure. It's not just AI failure, it's then the whole board that you have to be looking at.
Yeah, really super, super exciting. And I think we'll now dive into the takeaways for this pod and do a bit of a wrap up, James, really quickly. And, I suppose my key insight from today was about the people. That talent pipeline just reminded me with the hiring that we're doing right now that, it's your competitive position is the people that you have who are moving the needle for you within what you're doing. And you probably can't see this. This is probably one of those social capital things in your organization that you just aren't seeing. So maybe it's the question is whether you can afford to move. It's not it's not whether you can afford to move. It's whether you can afford not to. And how can you help you on that journey? How can your people who are sort of knowing everything about your business help you on that transformation journey? Because you don't want to leave it too late. You don't want to be one of the things that goes wrong is the people as a cost to your business. The people that really could have moved the needle for you went to another organization. So that's probably my key takeaway is about the talent. James, what's yours?
There's something that I'm a long-suffering Essendon Bombers supporter. For those who
You poor thing.
care, I know. Brad Scott, the coach of the Bombers, said something that was pretty interesting the other day on a commentator program. Everybody was saying to him, "Oh, what happens if you don't win any of the next three games? They're really winnable for you guys." Blah blah. And the pall that is cast over this conversation is that everybody reckons that he's going to get sacked soon, right? But he said something which I thought was really interesting and quite mature for any leader to have said in that situation. He said, "What happens if we win all three of them?" And that's the kind of that's the kind of mindset that we have to get into about AI, because even though we might feel like we're behind or we haven't seized all the opportunities that we might have, what if we did seize all the opportunities that we have from now? And
Yeah.
what if it does go really well? How can we make this into something that even we didn't think was possible? And how might we actually go about doing that? And so I think that's what I would love for people to take away from today. It's one thing to find the reasons why not, but it's another thing to reframe those challenges. But how might we overcome those kinds of problems? So it's a really powerful bit of reframing that we use a lot in this office.
I love that. I think that's brilliant. Let's do some snippets and clips and all of that, Yenny. Like that's brilliant. So look, next episode, we've got a cracker coming up as well. It's what our audience has been asking for. It's about the GPTs. And, we did a bit of a leaderboard heaps of podcasts ago, probably 15 podcasts ago, didn't we?
A long time ago now.
We did the tier stack, but we're actually just going to dive into it, just a couple. We're going to look at the definitely Claude and where it's come from, and all that revenue that now Anthropic have, and we're going to compare it to ChatGPT, to Gemini, maybe talk about Grok, and we're going to open up our sort of ideas about what we've been using, because we seem to have all of them open on our desktop, and we're going to give a rigorous, honest, no hype, typical zero shot, no hype breakdown of which actual AI model belongs in your business and why, which I think is critical to the businesses listening. And no benchmarks, no lab scores, any of that sort of stuff. And it's going to be awesome. So, we're looking forward to it. James, do you want to give us a final shout out to our sponsors, from Cowboy?
From Cowboy, the team over there at promcowboy.ai. If today's session made you think about how to actually get your team using AI properly, and I think it may have, hopefully, make sure you check out the agentic prompting feature, which they're pushing at the moment, which is fantastic. It's a really good logical starting point for people to start thinking about how to prompt agents and how to get them operating in your organization. So trot on over to promcowboy.ai.
Yeah, yeehaw. Look, thank you for joining Zero Shot, the Anti-Hype AI Business Podcast. It's been awesome having you with us, and that's it for today's session. We're building this Zero Shot podcast for the builders and the skeptics and the strategists and the developers and everybody who's actually moving the needle in their industry, so wherever you are. So thanks for listening. I was going through the stats with Yenia before, and wow, it's awesome to see how much growth. We've got lots of ratings coming in as well on Spotify. People keep those ratings going.
Thank you for your reviews, everyone. They're keeping us alive. It's amazing.
And thank you for outreach as well. So, if you heard something today that landed with you, send this episode to someone in your world that needs to hear it. The person in your team that basically keeps saying, we should do something about AI, or we should, let's not do any more inaction and things like that. Everything you've just heard in this pod. So we would genuinely love to hear from them and yourselves. So if you have a topic you want us to cover, thanks. Keep those coming in. We've had some great responses to our form. There's a form on our website where you can apply to become a speaker. Subscribe. Make sure you go to all of the different channels, Spotify, YouTube, Apple. Go and check out TikTok. Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And do you want to give a final shout out, James?
Yeah, mate. Shout out to Yenia Larotta, our hardworking and always smiling producer. Thank you very much, Yenia. Your work is never unnoticed. And to all of our listeners, folks, stay sharp, stay sovereign, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Cheers.